Cloudy skies and 56 degrees.
This is Dale Wetzel. This is the Legislature Today radio program. We're in our final week because it is the final week of the North Dakota Legislature. By hook or by crook, the rascals have to be done by Friday actually Saturday at 7 a.m. because that is day 80 of the North Dakota Legislature, and the North Dakota Constitution says to the legislature, thou shalt meet for no more than 80 days over 2 years. And if they need more time in that, the governor is going to have to step in and call a special session, which has its own hazards because a special session is open-ended. It can last forever, and who knows, maybe it will. But on our first half hour of the legislature today, we're going to have a remembrance of former Governor Bill Guy, who died last week. He is having 2 memorial services. One is tomorrow in Fargo. The second is Thursday in Thursday in Bismarck at the Presbyterian Church at both locations. And we have with us to discuss Governor Guy's legacy Mr. Clay Jenkinson, who is a humanities scholar, an author, and filmmaker. He made a documentary about Governor Guy. We also have with us a contemporary of Governor Guy. He's a contemporary who's on the phone with us. He's actually a senior federal judge, Myron Bright, and he is on the phone. We'll be getting to him and Mr. Jenkinson in a moment. First of all, a quick run-through of what happened in the legislature today. We had the governor, Jack Dalrymple, signed a tougher drunken driving law, a tougher law that carries harsher penalties for drunken driving. There were a number of people at the signing ceremony at the Capitol who have been, who are tragically familiar with the consequences of drunken driving. We had Tom and Arlene Deutscher and Lynn and Donna Mickelson. They are the parents, respectively, of Aaron Deutscher and Allison Deutscher, who were killed along with their young daughter, 18-month-old Brielle Deutscher, in a auto accident last July on Interstate 94, about 30 miles west of Jamestown. The Deutschers were riding toward Bismarck in their SUV when a person who had been drinking nearby, he was driving the wrong way down the interstate highway, collided with them head-on. The Deutscher family was killed, and so was the drunken driver. We also had at the ceremony Sandy Hernandez and Juan Ruiz, who lost their 2 young sons, aged 9 and 5, when a drunken driver ran over the tent in which the boys were sleeping. Again, this happened last July at the Lake Metagoshi campground. All 6 they were all represented at this ceremony. All of them attended. They all praised the new DUI law, although some of its critics say it is not tough enough. They did not. None of the folks who were there to speak on this went down that path, and we'll see to what extent the legislature intends to take steps to toughen the DUI law still further in future sessions. Also, Governor Jack Dalrymple appointed Maggie Anderson as the new director of the Department of Human Services. This is important because the Department of Human Services has perhaps more reach than any agency in state government. It is one of the largest, with 2,200 employees and a two-year budget of approximately $2.8 billion over 2 years. It administers the Medicaid program, which provides health benefits to approximately 65,000 low-income North Dakotans. And one of the things that's going to happen with the Medicaid program in the near future is it's going to be expanded to cover single adults who are low income and have no health insurance. And Maggie Anderson, who is appointed now as the new director of the Department of Human Services, is the former agency director of its Medical Services Division, which is in charge of Medicaid. So she's quite familiar with one of the agency's biggest jobs, which is administering the Medicaid program. One other thing of note, the North Dakota House approved a bill that includes $350 million in income tax cuts. Some of the House members think that's not large enough. Now this bill will go to the Senate, and we'll see what the Senate does with it. There are some senators who think that $350 million in income tax cuts is too large, and we'll see whether that view prevails. In the meantime, we'd like to move to our segment about former Governor William Lewis Guy, who was governor from 1961, is when he first took office in January 1961. He left office in 1972. He is the longest-serving governor in the history of the state of North Dakota. John Hoeven was elected, whom I mentioned earlier in a slip of the tongue. Governor Hoeven was elected to 3 4-year terms, but he served 10 years before he resigned in December of 2010 to become a U.S. Senator, an office that he won while he was serving as governor. So Governor Bill Guy still holds the distinction of being the longest-serving governor in the state of North Dakota's history. And in fact, Governor Guy was elected to the job 4 times, because back when Governor Guy was first elected as governor, the governor ran for a 2-year term. And it was only in 1964 that that he was able to run for a 4-year term. And so, in any case, we have with us Mr. Clay Jenkinson, who is the maker of a documentary on Governor Guy called The Charisma of Competence. And we also have with us Senior Federal Judge Myron Bright, a longtime friend of the governor. Welcome, Judge Bright, and welcome, Mr. Jenkinson.
Well, thanks, Dale. Glad to be on the program about Bill. He was certainly a wonderful friend of mine for almost 70 years, 67 to be exact.
Judge Bright, tell us how you met Governor Guy.
Well, I got interested in politics, and I was a precinct committeeman back in 1956. And at that time, Bill was a precinct committeeman out in rural Cass, and we got to meet each other. And in 1958, he was elected to the North Dakota Legislature, and I did some lobbying out there, and I got to see Bill and Jean and my wife Fritzy, as we called her, and I became very, very close friends, and both Fritzy and I were very much instrumental in getting the nomination of Bill Guy to run for governor on the Democratic ticket in 1960.
Judge,
I have one little comment, if I may.
Please do.
You talked about the legislative session and the appointment of an assistant to the governor. Well, when Bill Guy got to be governor, he was an effective governor because he appointed good people to work with him, and one of them was Ralph Dewing from the western part of North Dakota, who was really sort of his executive supervisor and did a tremendous job in administration.
Judge Bright, what did you like about Governor Guy? What attracted you?
Well, I liked several things. He was very modest, and he was very honest, and he was a good public servant. I went into and became engaged in politics not for any particular gain, but to do the best, get the best people elected we could in the state of North Dakota, at least those in the Democratic Party where I worked. And Bill was a true leader. He knew how to select people that would do the work, and sometimes it was a high political cost. And if I may, I'd like to tell you one story that was a real big political cost to Bill.
Please do, sir.
That was the story of why he did not get elected to the United States Senate. And I remember, I think that was in 1974, if I'm not wrong.
It was, sir.
And you remember that Jim Jungroth, the lawyer from Jamestown, who had been a Democrat, ran against him, and people said he took enough votes away from Bill Guy to deny Bill the election to the U.S. Senate. And here's the story behind it, and I got this direct from Jim Jungroth some years ago. Jim was angered at Bill Guy because Jim Jungroth wanted to be the attorney for the state hospital in Jamestown. There was a Republican, I don't remember his name, he was also prominent in the legislature, who'd been the attorney for the state hospital in Jamestown for many years. And Bill refused to fire that man, that attorney. He'd been doing a good job, and give it to a party person. For Bill, politics came second to good government. And that was a term that I used for Bill. He was a person who believed in good government. But that episode cost him, I think, the election to the U.S. Senate, because Jim Jungroth never got over it, and it took out his revenge in running against Bill Guy when Bill was running against Senator Young.
Mr. Jenkinson, what was your, as you were making the documentary, what impressions did you draw about Governor Guy?
Well, I shared Judge Bright's view that he was a man of unbelievable integrity, extraordinary intelligence, a great listener, and he was a humble man. He was a wonderfully humble man. He tells the story, for example, of when he went to the lakes of Minnesota on a summer vacation, and he had a young family of 5 children, so they drove their station wagon. They stopped at a gas station in a little town in Minnesota, and the kid came out who was pumping gas and said, "Hey, how do you get the license plate ND1?" And Bill Guy said, "Well, you have to be the governor of North Dakota." And the kid said, "Yeah, but how did you get it?" Because Bill was so understated and so humble, and he didn't have that pride. He didn't have to be in your face about his quality. He was maybe, in my opinion, the most important governor in North Dakota history. He's certainly in anyone's list in the top 5. And people say, well, that's a long time ago. It is, but he served for 12 years for a reason. He brought North Dakota from sort of its Middle Ages, when we still had outhouses and not very many good roads, and our educational system wasn't that good. And he brought us into the second half of the 20th century. And we associate him with concrete and the missile bases and the interstate highway system and the great boom in higher education and good and efficient government. Doesn't sound very attractive or glamorous, but he reworked the North Dakota government system and gave us true accounting principles and an Office of Management and Budget for the first time.
Why did you call your documentary The Charisma of Competence?
Because he didn't have the charisma of Ted Kennedy. He didn't have the charisma of JFK. He didn't have the charisma of Everett Dirksen, great orators.
Well, few people do, though.
Few people do, but what he had was competence. And Larry Remley, who was a great North Dakota historian who died far too young, said, it wasn't the kind of charisma you associate with Muhammad Ali. It was really the charisma of competence, that he was an engineer, a technocrat who knew how to fine-tune government. And, he was courted, Bill Guy, in the 1950s by both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and he wound up becoming a Democrat, but he would have been a centrist, moderate Republican had he gone that direction.
How do you think that a person like Governor Guy would function in today's political environment?
He'd master it. He knew how to work across the aisle. He respected good ideas. One of the things that I deplore a little bit is people locked into party ideologies and not able to see outside of them. If he saw a good idea, he went for it. He appointed young people. He appointed women. He wanted excellence, and wherever he found it, he pursued it. And, of course, we all know he appointed the 26-year-old Deputy Tax Commissioner, Byron Dorgan, to be the Tax Commissioner of North Dakota, and that launched one of the most successful political careers in North Dakota history.
Judge Bright, you were there when it was going on, that Governor Guy was taking effectively the steps that it took to build the North Dakota Democratic Party. And what was that like?
Well, he was very effective in building the party. He went to all of the meetings. He was friendly with everybody. One of the things that Clay mentioned was what a great governor he was. Well, we are benefiting right today from something that Bill did, and it was hard to do. And that was in the middle of the 60s when the question came up, should North Dakota go on daylight savings time? The farmers said, look, our chickens don't give eggs on daylight time, our cows don't give milk on daylight time. We're a rural state, we ought to stay on standard time. But Bill felt differently, and he had a lot of opposition, but he signed the bill that put North Dakota on daylight saving time, and we have it now. And, of course, there are a couple of states in this country that are still on standard time, and we might have still been on standard time if it hadn't been for Bill. And I might say that in 1967, we had a dinner banquet honoring Bill for his work. It was on May 13th, 1967, where we honored Bill, and Hubert Humphrey, the Vice President of the United States, was the main speaker, and the song that night was, "My Time is Your Time to Commemorate," among other things, Bill's confidence, but particularly going on daylight saving time. It was a tremendous affair.
Mr. Jenkinson, I guess I'd like both of you gentlemen to address this question. Bill Guy had dealt mostly with Republicans during his administration. He had almost exclusively a Republican legislature. He had Republican lieutenant governors who were elected separately. He had other Republican office holders in the Capitol, but yet he managed to succeed, I guess I'd say in spite of that, if that's maybe that's carrying it a bit too far, but he managed to succeed even though most of the positions of power were held by the other party. How did he manage that?
He was a centrist. He wasn't a liberal Democrat. He had some liberal leanings at certain points in his life, but he was basically a problem solver, and he could easily have succeeded in either party. What North Dakota needed in 1960 was to stop being a dirt poor farm state that was backward. And Bill Guy had pride in North Dakota. He created the North Dakota Hall of Fame, the Rough Rider Award, and named the first 6 people to it. He went to national conventions and spoke proudly of being a North Dakotan. When I saw him at the age of 8 talking about North Dakota on national television, I swelled with pride for this state for the first time in my life. He was a party man, but it never got in the way of doing good business for North Dakota. But I'd certainly like to hear what the judge says.
Well, he was a person who was widely respected and admired. If I remember right, he had the chairmanship of the Governor's Conference of the United States at one time.
He did in 1966.
And I know that people I've talked to in Washington, D.C., and including the president at one time, that's President Lyndon Johnson, all had the greatest respect and admiration for Bill Guy. And I mentioned this party this affair banquet we had for Bill and Jean in 1967. Well, there were well over 2,500 people who came to the city auditorium to that banquet. We had to feed them in shifts, and many were Republicans. Bill had the respect of Democrats and Republicans and independents because, as Clay said, they recognized competence, and Bill was very, very competent.
Judge Bright, after Bill Guy lost the Senate election, he basically never was active in electoral politics again. Why was that?
Well, I can't answer that question, really, because, he'd been governor 12 years, he'd run for Senate, And then he became a senior citizen, and you may remember he was on the board of directors of this energy company that, that big energy company out near Minot. And he went to work. Yes. He had to work to sustain his large family. And he was kind of a senior citizen. But if you remember, he was active in supporting many projects in this state of North Dakota. Particularly, he was interested in water projects. He was concerned about the garrison diversion, and he had his voice in many issues that affect our people then, since his being in politics, and even up to almost today.
Mr. Jenkinson, I'd like you to address Bill Guy's role in water development, because I think that's probably, if there's a single issue that he might be remembered for, it'd be that.
I got to know Bill and Jean Guy when he was in his 80s, and I had known of him when I was a young man, but I did not get to know him. And I had the good fortune, Dale, of interviewing Bill and Jean for about 30 hours for the documentary that we did at the Dakota Institute up at the Lewis and Clark Fort Mandan Foundation. He was so gentle, so thoughtful, so intelligent, but he was still in his 80s worrying about water. And the one thing that he never was able to accomplish in his life was to stabilize the water situation for the Red River. As you know, the Red floods in the spring, in wet years, but in dry years it almost runs dry. There is not enough water in the Red River to supply the growing needs of Fargo and Grand Forks. He understood this, and his goal was to get this stabilized on both ends, the flood side and the drought side. And garrison diversion was the solution for a long time. But at the end of his life, he was no longer interested in garrison diversion. He wanted a pipeline from the Missouri along the I-94 corridor to Fargo. He wasn't able to accomplish that. It's a pity, because we are going to have to fix that problem for North Dakota to thrive in the 21st century. And as an engineer, he understood that, but he could not ever find a way to get it done. It's really too bad.
Judge Bright, what did you think of Governor Guy's water development emphasis?
Well, I thought he was just on the ball. I mean, I have not entered into politics for 45 years since I've been a federal circuit judge. But, I watch it. I'm interested in North Dakota, and I've always felt that Bill was pressing for those projects that would really make this state better all of the time and for the good of all of the people. He was a wonderful man. He was a wonderful person, a wonderful governor.
Judge Bright, is there anything else that you'd like to say? We're coming to the end of the segment here, and I just want to say whatever you'd like.
Well, Bill was a very modest man, too. I have to tell you that, just before he became governor, his right to be governor was challenged under a provision of the Constitution which says any legislator who votes to increase the emoluments of another office cannot run for that office. Well, when Bill was in the legislature authorized a Cadillac automobile, and also, I think, for the governor to be on Social Security, and he was challenged.
I'm sorry, Judge Bright. I'm going to have to cut you off. I'm sorry, Judge Bright. I'm going to have to cut you off. In any case, Governor Guy won that challenge because he was governor for 12 more years. Thank you, Judge Bright, for your time, and thank you, Mr. Jenkinson. I do appreciate it.
A great man, a giant.
Yes, he was. He was a giant, as I said. Thank you very much for permitting me to say something about Bill.
This is Dale Wetzel, and this is the Legislature Today.